Okay, so a follow-up video on the previous video of setting up a vermiculture bin, a worm composter. I'm going to talk a bit about how to maintain it, how to feed the worms, and then in a future video, once we've been running this for a while, then how to harvest those worm casting as a soil amendment. Okay, so if you recall from a previous video, and I'll link that video in the description, set up this worm bin. It's a very simple double stacked bin. The worms live in the top bin that has air holes along the sides and the drainage holes on the bottom. The bottom bin simply collects any excess moisture. If you do things right, you shouldn't have any excess moisture, but it's always good to have that escape valve. Okay, these worms have been in here for about a week. I have fed them one time. Typically, I'd be feeding them daily once that population's built, but I started with a very small colony population here. So let me show you how it's going and explain some of the steps I've taken in the past week to keep these guys healthy. And you'll notice I've put these sheets of newspaper over the top. One of the things you might notice, and it happens frequently actually, the worms might try to crawl their way out. Especially once you've initially set it up, they'll start crawling up the walls. I have this set up pretty well. There really isn't any point of escape for them, but you do want them down into the medium where the food is. One of the tricks you can do is simply open up the bin and turn on some lights. Worms don't like light, right? So once you turn on the lights, they're going to crawl back down to the medium pretty quickly. Okay, leave the newspaper on the top so they're still protected. But this is a quick and easy way to prevent the worms from leaving the medium. All right, so about a week ago, I put some food over in this corner. It was a mix of vegetable and fruit waste. Really all that's left that I can see are some apple and banana peels. They got through almost all of the softer stuff. So that is a really good sign. That means I'm not overfeeding them and I'm not underfeeding them. Okay, some of that more tenacious material is going to stick around for a little bit, but they'll get through it eventually, especially as it gets mushier over time. Okay, so I'm just going to keep working my way across the back here as I feed them, move the newspaper aside. All right, so here's a little tray of food. One of the tricks I accidentally stumbled across is if you keep the food in the freezer and then defrost it, it becomes much more usable by the worms. The act of freezing it crystallizes the water, obviously, that's what ice is, but that breaks down the cell walls of the material. Right? Those ice crystals are very sharp, so it draws out the water, breaks down the cell walls, and makes it much more edible. Now, some people would take this and then puree it in a blender, which makes it very easy for the worms to eat. It's almost like baby food. That's a bridge too far for me. I don't need to take those steps. But if you're going to try this, you decide how much time and effort you want to put into it. You know, once you put this stuff in the blender, well, then you have a blender to clean. So you decide what you would like to do. For me, I think just freezing it, defrosting it, and then adding a bit of food in there. I'm not going to add all of this. Some of this will be set aside for my other worm bins, those worm factories that I have. Okay, so I'm just going to put the food in here and cover it back up with the newspaper. Okay, while they're getting established in here, I do check them fairly regularly. After a while, I'm not going to do that anymore. Don't want to be disturbing them unnecessarily. Okay, but I do want, at least at this initial stage, keep track of how much they're eating, if I'm overfeeding them, if I'm underfeeding them. And one other thing I always want to check is the moisture. Okay, so we just have this shredded newspaper and cardboard. Okay, so I have a handful of it here, and it feels like a damp sponge, which is about perfect. If I squeeze it, no water drips out. Okay, so this is about perfect. Okay, if it needed a little more water, I'd just get my spray bottle, spray the surface of it, let it soak in. If it felt a little too wet, I'd simply add some more newspaper across the top. Okay, that way you maintain that balance time after time. So every time you check the bin, I recommend doing that quick squeeze test. First, make sure there are no worms in there. That would be tragic. Just do that squeeze test and just feel it. You know, it just needs to feel like a damp sponge that's been wrung out really well. And then you have a perfect moisture for your medium. Remember, those worms need water all the time. Otherwise, they dry out and die. Okay, so that's it for now. The next video will be an update on how it's looking, and then hopefully a harvest of compost in time for spring gardening. Okay, so thank you, and I'll see you next time.